Douglas Wilson, Inspector General, Office of Inspector General, regarding SB 1803. How you doing?
I'm fine, sir. How are you?
Doing good.
It's good.
Like your bow tie.
Thank you.
I worked for a guy who wore a bow tie all the time. State your name for the record and talk to us about Senate Bill 1803.
Sure. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. My name is Douglas Wilson. I serve as Inspector General for the Health and Human Services Commission. I am here to visit with you about Senate Bill 1803 and the impact that it has had on the Office of Inspector General. As you know, Senate Bill 1803 passed last session. It strengthened our efforts to combat fraud, waste, and abuse in the Medicaid program and also ensure due process for providers. A portion of the bill also changed what was formerly known as an integrity review process for the Office of Inspector General and morphed that into what is now known as a preliminary investigation. It also imposed time frames within which a preliminary investigation needed to start, which was a 30-day time frame to allow us time to determine whether or not we needed to move the prelim into a full-scale investigation. It also required the office to adopt rules establishing criteria for initiating and conducting a full-scale fraud or abuse investigation, and it established minimum training requirements for investigators. The bill also gave OIG an additional 17 FTEs, required us to hire a dental officer as well as a medical officer. We also hired a dental hygienist to help with our cases, and 16 of the FTEs have been hired. The one position remaining to be hired is an attorney. The bill further established informal resolution meetings and indicated that providers were entitled to at least 2 informal resolution meetings. To date, we've held 76 informal resolution meetings. The bill also required that the meetings be recorded and did not provide that the meetings are confidential. The bill also allowed providers to post a surety bond in lieu of being placed on a payment hold. The bill further indicated that we include additional language in our notices to providers regarding either payment holds or overpayments, and required us to be specific regarding the types of issues that we had identified that caused us to place the provider on a payment hold and or question an overpayment amount. The bill further required that OIG update our website and provide process flow charts on our website that laid out the flow for the CAF process, as well as the credible allegation of fraud process, as well as the overpayment process. And it required the office to provide a video educating providers on the OIG investigative process. We just completed that video in August of 2014. On the last page, I included just a timeline of when a number of the requirements in the bill were accomplished by OIG. The dental director was hired on June 2013. Our medical officer was hired in August of 2013. We revised our policies and procedures for prelim investigations in August of 2014 as well. We also revised our procedures regarding the informal resolution meetings, and posted the process flow charts in May of 2014. We had to develop new rules for the full-scale investigations and make reference to minimum investigator training. That was also done in April of 2014. We had to develop rules with SOA, State Office of Administrative Hearings, and develop an MOU with SOA. The rules were put in place in April of 2014. The MOU was completed in August as well. And then we completed the video, as I just mentioned, in August of 2014. That concludes my presentation. I'll answer any questions.
General, they call you General?
Doug is good.
Okay. General Doug. So, you know, I don't know what to say about all this stuff, but why don't I ask you to sort of tell us a little bit about, were you in front of the Senate Finance Committee or the Health and Human Services? Health and Human Services, I think, the other day with our new chairman, Senator Schwartner, and,
that's correct.
And then Chair Jane Nelson as well.
That is correct.
I read up on some of the concerns they raised. Why don't you talk a little bit about what they asked and what you said?
That was on Senate Bill 8.
Didn't have to do with this?
No.
It didn't have
the
to do with
last hearing was
investigation?
SB 8. SB 8 has some provided FTEs for OIG as well and has some additional requirements for OIG,
Okay, well,
but it wasn't 18.
were they asking you specifically about, were they asking specifically about how many cases you guys have brought forth, how many doctors that were, that you were looking at having overcharged, overbilled, right, and so forth? Can you sort of give us an idea of where those investigations are?
Yes, so as you know, Chairman Raymond, the investigative process, we're the sort of the front end of that process. People are asking me sort of how many dollars have we recovered from the investigative process. The due process that 1803 lays out indicates that providers are entitled to the 2 informal reviews, as well as after that they have an option to go to a SOA hearing or to HHSC appeals for a hearing. When they request a hearing, my office schedules the hearing with SOA, and then there's a process where they can ask for a continuance, and if you're familiar with the legal process. So once we ask for the scheduling of the hearing, my office does not have control over when the hearing is actually scheduled. So until those hearings are scheduled and heard out, we're in the due process that has been afforded for the providers and, of course, the state.
Well, should I ask you to what extent you were able to recover before this bill went into effect?
Yes, of course, sir. 2 things. We have probably settled 14 cases. I don't have the numbers in front of me. 14 cases for a total of $14 million or so. I think we recovered $5 million of that because many of the providers, of course, are doing repayment agreements. Some 5 years, some 10 years, some more, depending upon their ability to pay. The state back in the timelines for that sort of thing. As I've said, some of the providers have gone out of business. When they go out of business, there is nothing to recover. We don't owe the federal government anything, and of course the state does not recover as well. Other
So if
providers in
somebody's
the due
gone out of
process.
business, so if somebody's gone out of business, has the state done whatever we should to then at least go after those people to try to put them in jail?
Well, here's what I can say, Chairman Raymond, and people often ask me that question. My office does not prosecute
I asked
Medicaid
you,
fraud.
we, the state. I didn't say you. I said
We've
we,
made
the state.
referrals to the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. Where they are with those cases is not something I can
So
answer.
none of them have been, as far as you know, have any of them, let me rephrase, as far as you know, if you make a referral to
Medicaid
that
fraud.
office, right, Attorney General, right, then you're done with, you can't do anything else at that point, except maybe
Not on the
give them
criminal
whatever
side.
information you have, right?
Right.
Have any of those that you have recommended, if you're recommending it, I assume that you think that they should be prosecuted, right? And so have any of those, in fact, been pursued and gone to prosecution?
Yes, they have.
And have we been successful with any of them?
I get notices on occasion from Rick Copeland. As I said in the other hearing that you may have listened to, those cases can take 2, 3, 4 years before they culminate. But when the one gets to its completion, Rick Copeland, the Director of Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, will share with me the announcement that comes out from the Office of Attorney General announcing the conviction or the sentencing.
So there have been some?
Yes, there have.
You know how many, roughly?
Once again, I don't track that for Mafuku, but I'm sure Mr. Copeland or someone from OIG can answer that for you.
Well, what members, you want to ask any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fallon?
If you could just walk me through, and I apologize for I had to step out.
Sure.
In your opinion, if you had more investigators in your office, do you think it would make that easier to identify fraud? And maybe down the line, easier to convict folks that are guilty of fraud?
Great question, Representative Fallon. So first let me say, I think having additional investigators allows us to act more quickly when we get allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse. I think to date what we're experiencing in the OIG is, and it kind of speaks to what Chairman Raymond is speaking of, we've got a number of investigations that we have worked, and now they're sort of going through the process. So you have a number that are feeding in, and then you've got us trying to set hearings with either SOA, State Office of Administrative Hearings, and or HHSC appeals, and then those processes can take a long time. So when that begins to happen, you have depositions now that are taking place. You have additional work that may need to be done by those investigators on that particular case. You have additional briefings for your consultants, let's say, that has to happen. So, for instance, my dental director, Dr. Altenhoff, is being pulled to do depositions. She's being pulled to do trainings, to go and listen in on informal resolution meetings. So that's taking her time away from looking at new cases that are coming through. where she could be spending. So we're kind of seeing a number of things now. The investigators that have worked cases, they've now got depositions that are scheduled. They've got to show up and work with the attorneys that are assigned to prosecute the case. And so I kind of see the funnel is coming in, and then we're getting to a point where we're identifying the cases, and then they're coming into the process of trials and hearings, and that's taking some time. I think the fact that you have investigators that are there to, when we see things that are trending or get those complaints, can act on the complaint very quickly, conduct the prelim fast to determine if there's something that's actionable on our part, absolutely allows us to stop the bleeding much sooner. But then the process of getting to hearing is an interesting process. My cases that go to SOA are one of many cases that SOA has to see. So I get in line, like the other agencies, to be heard. And that can take, I mean, they do the best job they can, of course, but that can take some time. And then I'm asked about, well, why didn't that case come to culmination? I mean, it hasn't been heard yet.
How many investigators do you have on staff right now?
If I'm talking just Medicaid provider integrity and not general investigations, which is a SNAP fraud cases, off the top of my head, Representative
Ballpark.
76, okay. 80 maybe.
75 to 80, fair to say. Okay.
And that's with the addition that you guys gave us last
week. When you mentioned the dental investigator, is she a dentist?
Yes, she is. Dr. Altenhoff is a dentist who was formerly dental director for HHSC, I think DSHS years ago, and then we brought her on as our dental officer, and then we have a dental hygienist also that we brought on to help her with those cases.
How many dentists do you employ? Is it just her?
Just her. We have a position posted for another dentist because she came on board and was really kicking cases out for us pretty quickly at a pretty good rhythm. And then, as I said, she's been pulled and now give depositions. She supports the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit with their cases, so we have a sort of a dentist in a bag, what I'll call it, which allows her to go out with a computer and do in-mouth x-rays and take photos of kids' teeth and that kind of thing. So she works with them also on their cases to determine if work has actually been done on a kid, and so she's traveling with them doing that with the hygienist, and she's now working on our cases as well. But that's sort of also a part of
and forgive me for being the layperson here as far as dentistry goes, but does she also help out with the orthodontist issues with the braces and things like that?
Yes, so she'll review those cases, but normally we do sort of a peer-to-peer review. So if it's an orthodontic case, we have orthodontists that are on contract with us that specifically look at those cases. So yeah, we will deal with those orthodontists that are on the contract. And as you know, most of them have their own private practices, and so we're sort of in line when they have time to get to our case, but most of them are pretty good at working our cases and that sort of thing.
In your professional opinion, and I'm not holding you to this, just what do you think is the percentage of taxpayer money that's expended in Medicare and Medicaid and really all the human services that we do in the state of Texas that are perhaps billed fraudulently? I mean, is it 1%, is it 10%, is it 25%?
We participate in what's called the Medicaid Integrity Institute, which is a USDOJ training facility in South Carolina where all the program integrity directors across the nation come together to talk, and we have this conversation annually for the most part. So the estimates are roughly around 10% being the low. Some will say as high as 15, 18%. I don't know that anybody knows the answer. When I say 10 to 15, 18, I'm including not just the fraudulent part, but just overpayments that occur because the provider may or may not know what they should be doing. So the accepted estimates are around 10 to 15 to 18% or so, which is, if you look at the spend for both Medicare and Medicaid, we're talking a lot of money.
Yeah, oh yeah. Is my mic on? Yeah. When you're talking to other folks from across the country, do you think Texas is in line or with other states, or do we have less fraud or the same amount or more? I know we have unique challenges. I mean, we're a border state with 26 million people. We're not Vermont with a tiny population either. But
I think we have our unique challenges here in Texas. I think we're somewhat in line. I think what we've seen over time is, and it's accepted across the nation, that Florida is probably the largest state when it comes to fraud, waste, and abuse. And generally, when you see new things trending, it'll happen in Florida first, and then it'll move to other states. So, we talk to Florida a lot about what they're seeing, and they share with us and others things that are happening in their state. But, the larger states, Texas, California, New York, that sort of thing. New York is another big one. Florida, those top four, we see a lot of the same kinds of things, and their spend is pretty close to what Texas, some larger, some a little bit smaller. But we see a lot of the same types of cases, and the movement of those cases is pretty much the same as well. So we share a lot of information at a lot of the conferences and trainings that we go to about specific. Some states, like say Arizona, Tennessee, are largely managed care, and they've shared their experiences in the managed care environment and things they've seen and assumptions they've made going in and things they've learned since then. That has helped them and help us as we consider what we do in managed care environment instead of Texas, that sort of thing.
You kind of answered my next question, which was, do you all share in best practices? And it sounds like you do across the state.
Yes, sir. Some of my staff is on faculty with MII. Their staff's on faculty with MII. I'm on faculty with MII. So we all get a chance to share sort of what we're doing. In some areas, they think Texas is leading. In other areas, other states are definitely leading, and we learn from one another and share various practices and trends.
How concerned should the chairman and the rest of this committee be on organized crime and fraud vis-a-vis human services provided? I just know I read a lot of articles about what's happening in New York City with some organized crime and...
Yeah, I think, clearly as you attend the conferences and trainings at MI and others, it is definitely something that's on the rise across, I think, the nation in various areas. That organized crime is definitely moving to the medical field. The guesses are with, U.S. Attorney's offices and people that do this type of work in other states and the Medicaid fraud control units as well as, you can make a lot of money, and if you are sentenced or prosecuted, that your time in jail because this white-collar crime is nothing in comparison to doing drugs or prostitution.
So the money's better and the penalty's not as severe?
Yes, sir.
And organized criminals are not stupid?
Not at all. They're very wise.
This is easier than moving heroin from Afghanistan, I would think. So,
a lot of money goes that way.
What's the worst? What's the longest sentence that you know of someone being prosecuted in the state of Texas? What they received?
Ooh. That would be I want to say it was I'm going to get this wrong, Representative, I can follow with Rick Copeland. I want to say it was a DME prosecution, durable medical equipment prosecution with the Medicaid fraud control unit, and I want to say the person got like 25 years, which was like almost unprecedented for a white-collar crime case. But this particular judge acted.
25 years.
So I'll follow that up with Rick.
Yeah, my office, I'll have to give your office a call. I'd love to know a little bit more about that. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
So you've heard of the Gambinos and the Gottis, right?
Only on TV, sir.
Have you heard of the Xerox?
I've heard of the Xerox, more than I care to.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Xerox and what's going on there and how many millions that involves? Just what you know. So we've sued, let me help you. We've sued Xerox, is that right?
Yes, sir, we have.
For how much are we suing them? Do you know?
I don't know the dollar amount.
It's in the hundreds.
It's huge. Yes, sir.
Maybe even billion.
Possibly.
I think it's billions, right? It's in the billions. I am told by my assistant over here.
That's what I'm trying to get.
So we've had some private conversations, and let me ask you, and you can answer publicly if you want. With reference to orthodontia, right, and that's a big issue.
Yes,
a big issue at this point. So what has happened is you had all these claims come in, right, and we, the state of Texas, hired somebody, contracted with a company that's owned with Xerox.
Yes, we did. For
years now, and we basically said, you guys are in charge. We're trusting you to review these. We're paying you to review these. To some extent, we're privatizing this part of state government. Instead of having a bunch of people sitting over here at HHSC, we're going to privatize. We're going to go with a private company and pay you to make sure that you have the personnel that you're supposed to have to then look at these claims as they come in and say, do they need braces or not, right? Mm-hmm. And apparently thousands and thousands and thousands of claims adding to millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars were approved. And we've had 2 or 3, I forget how many, audits done, right?
Yes, sir.
And said they're not doing their job. They're not hiring personnel, they're hiring, you told me, some high school graduates, people that didn't have any kind of medical training, expertise, and they're approving all these, right? And we continue to re-up that contract, by the way. It's before the Tea Party. Tea Party would never let this happen. But before the Tea Party, right? So we re-upped the contract, and they've continued to approve all these claims that orthodontists were sending in, right?
Yes.
And so finally, now you're pursuing a lot of those doctors saying, y'all cheated, you stole, whatever, I'm coming after you, you need to pay us back, and you've got a bunch of those claims, right? And we're probably going to hear some testimony along those lines in a minute. But as you and I discussed it, it's kind of like, somebody working in a bank, right? Mm-hmm. And they talk to somebody, say, hey, Pat, why don't you come rob me? Right? Yeah, this is the best time for you to come. Come at 3:15. There are very few people there. Come and rob me there at that time, and that's when the security guard goes to get a sandwich or whatever. So he comes in, he robs me, I give him the money, and then we split it later, right? And so you're both, if you're caught, you're both going to get,
Sure.
taken to the woodshed, right?
Yeah.
So what you expressed to me is that, let me see, do you believe that if, in fact, all these orthodontists were submitting claims that should not have been approved, your position is they should have known that they should never have been approved, right? It's kind of an inside job because they knew that the guy, Xerox, is sitting over there and we're paying them millions of dollars to review these claims, but they're not really reviewing them. They're just letting them go through. They're just letting them go through. Right. So your position is the orthodontist is still guilty because he knew that they were going to let him go through and that he should have never submitted them in the first place, right?
Correct.
Now, is it also your position that Xerox did wrong by not doing their job?
Yes, sir. I've always held that the state has two causes of action. One against the providers. We had contracts with two different areas. A contract with providers that said they would do certain things, only submit claims for clients that needed orthodontia. We had a contract with TMHP that said they would only authorize claims for clients that needed orthodontia. I think both of those contracts failed us.
Mm-hmm. That's your position, okay?
Yes, it is.
So, so what is the latest? What's going on? I know we don't have the Attorney General here, but what is the latest on the lawsuit then against Xerox?
That lawsuit, as you know, is not being handled at all by OIG, so we're not really involved in that.
You're not following it at all?
No, I'm involved in the extent that the federal government, of course, did their audit of the program, and they gave us the initial results regarding all the things that TMHP Xerox did not do that you referenced earlier. There's another report that they've let me know that will be coming out that will have dollars attached to it, where they're going to be asking the state of Texas in all likelihood for recovery of a certain amount of dollars, and you said hundreds of millions probably.
Well, I mean, and if we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, if you're right, and if the Attorney General's Civil Division is right, they filed a lawsuit, right? I mean, I can't imagine that we don't prosecute, we don't try to get these guys at Xerox, somebody go to prison. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars? Any of us up here stole, a lot less than that, and we'd all be going to jail, I guarantee you, right? Well, I think, anyway, I don't know. But this is an issue, members, that it's a lot bigger, and it's been oversimplified, I think, in recent, certainly last session. I'm really concerned about this issue with Xerox, and that
Sure.
we continued to re-up that contract, even though the audits showed that the work wasn't being done, and it was costing us apparently hundreds of millions of dollars. So, members, any questions? Dr. Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, I want to get a sense for what happens when practices, they initially get targeted and then ultimately nothing's found out. So what's kind of the return of the number of initial investigations you do, targets, if you will? How many of those result in some kind of monetary consequence, settlement, or something of that nature?
Representative Doris, I haven't gone through and actually looked at, I mean, I can have my staff go back and say we initiated investigations on this many providers, how many subsequently went out of business, how many we pursued to a SOAR hearing, then they went out of business and said they were broke and we couldn't recover anything. I haven't done that, but of course we can get you that information.
Well,
I know how many settlements we have, but I don't know the disposition of all the cases.
My concern really is kind of the collateral damage that can be done, that when a practice is targeted, there is the accessing of records, there's the whole process that you go through, which it looks like you all have made some efforts to expedite that, but that because of the prolonged period of time that somebody could have a payment withhold or some amount of a payment withhold percent-wise,
Correct.
Some of the experiences that have been shared with me, again, that's why I'm trying to get a feel of the actual numbers, have been pretty extraordinary, to the point that short of, really significant resources, wouldn't be able to stay in business and stuff. But yet, doesn't appear that there was any wrongdoing, certainly not any fraudulent, maybe some program errors or some details of things that might not have been present and stuff. But I hear some of this, and so I guess what I'm trying to get a sense of is, I'm all about squeezing out fraud and abuse.
Sure.
Get rid of that. There's no place for that in my world, and certainly I don't think taxpayers should be subject to any of that. But there are the consequences of bona fide, practices that are providing good care, that maybe they get dinged on something smaller than that, but yet there is a pretty profound impact to that practice while they're waiting for the process to go through.
Right. So as you know, Representative Zerwas, the 1803 allows for providers to put up a bond. Of course, the idea of the bond is, and why the feds did the concept of a credible allegation of fraud was nationwide. They observed that states would have information that suggested that a provider had either one, engaged in fraudulent activity and or been grossly overpaid, and the state did nothing in any hurried way to recover the funds. So we continued to pay good money, they would say, after bad. So the idea was, the moment that a state sees something that looks like a credible allegation of fraud, we're required to put a payment hold on and stop any future bleeding until we get to the end of that matter. The bond, I think, was a good idea, because what it basically says is if you post a bond, and we've determined that if, kind of using the last 12 months of payment for a provider as an indication of what we might expect to go out in the next 12 months, let's say, as the basis for establishing that bond amount, so that basically the state can demonstrate to the federal government as well that, yeah, we continue to pay them, but we have a bond that says if we get to the end of this situation, the hearing or whatever, and we prevail, we can get our money back, because, as you know, a business that's operating has expenses. So if I pay out $10,000, you won't have $10,000 when I go to seek it. You might have $1,000 if you're doing 10% gross profit and sort of thing. So that's sort of the idea. I mean, I'm not sure how to. The idea in my office is, and I tell my guys this all the time, we're the Office of Inspector General. We try to comply with whatever rules, statutes, laws, or whatever that exist. I don't necessarily look behind them, and so the expectation is that we put a credible allegation of fraud payment hold on, or we expose the state to additional monies going out. We're probably going to put the credible allegation of fraud hold on, and we'll follow all the due process rights that are in Senate Bill 1803 as well as Senate Bill 8, and we'll utilize the bond, surety bond requirements that are in that bill as well, and whatever else is the will of the legislature. I don't have all answers.
Well, maybe if you could just give me a sense of, what the ratio is of the targeted investigations you do versus what the result is of that, and then maybe this is at a future time, the process of extrapolation, that once you go through a period of an investigation and you determine there is some kind of error, let's say something short of absolute fraud, but there's some kind of error out there, and then there's an extrapolation made in terms of what the ultimate fine is on that.
Sure. Our office employs actuaries, same as, say, the Attorney General's office does. We will pull a statistically valid random sample. Actuaries will confirm how we pull that sample. That will be determine which files we go pull from a provider. Of course, we will get files, make copies. They keep the originals. We come back to our office. We will do a review of those records, have a consultant, and we're talking orthodontia, let's say, have an orthodontic consultant review the records, come up with an error rate, which may be they bill for something that doesn't appear happened. The X-ray on the kid doesn't demonstrate that that filling occurred. They bill. It could be a number of things. So the errors may be a number of different errors. Based on the errors that come back, there is an extrapolation to the population of the dollars associated with those errors, and we're pretty much off. And you pretty much did the same thing with the audit that the federal government is doing of us. Same type of process. They pull the sample, they're going to extrapolate to the population, and we'll be presented in all likelihood with a bill.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Fallon?
Just another quick question. Thanks. So I just want to back up and kind of so I can digest this. You don't randomly pick folks to investigate. There has to be a credible allegation of fraud before your office initiates anything. Is that correct?
So two things now, Representative Fallon. Historically, OIG has had a system called the Medicaid Fraud and Abuse Detection System, sort of known as MFADS, which is sort of a data analytics system where we could do targeted queries, let's say. So we wanted to know the highest billers for whatever, or the outliers for a type of service. And so we get complaints, or we generate cases from, I'll say, a couple of ways. One being we get complaints or allegations from a number of sources. We run a hotline. We've got an online method to get us complaints. Somebody just calls us. My investigators are investigating someone else, and a client gives a lead that, no, you're focusing on Dr. Zerwash, you should be looking at someone, that kind of thing. But in addition to that,
Did he do something?
a bad example for you.
We got it back. We got it back, man.
Right. In addition to that, we now have a data analytics system that's called Torch that allows us to look at behaviors and other things that indicate there may be something going on with this provider, this group of providers, and then based upon that, we'll pull claims.
So you have a program that can, identify outliers and suspicious activity just on analytics. Okay.
Absolutely.
Once you notify an office that you are going to conduct an investigation, what percentage of those offices, let's say in the next month, have their Medicaid, Medicare billing go down?
All of them.
100%.
100%. Irregardless of if, even when we do the investigation, we haven't made a determination or anything yet, the billings go
But
down.
magically it goes down because they get maybe a little bit tighter and more careful on their billing.
Amazingly.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
How many investigations do you guys initiate every year, roughly?
I think the high year was FY11, and we did 12 maybe. We had 108, then 75. We haven't done generally over 100 investigations each year. So when you consider that there's over 70, 80,000 Medicaid providers in the system, and we're investigating less than 100 every year.
And if you think that, who knows exactly, but if 10% of the billing is fraudulent, and we have 78,000 providers, statistics would say it could be 7,800.
So there's a lot of people we're not looking at.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you.
At all. Sure.
Let me ask you, do you think that there's any government program out there, or any government regulation or any law that is complied with 100%? That there's no level?
In my estimation?
That there's no level of non-compliance?
No, so like speeding ticket, no.
No, right.
We see it posted, we violate.
Everything.
But we get a ticket.
So you're starting to get to the numbers that he was asking about, I think, right? Because you said you do 100 a year or 75 a year, and he was asking of those that you look at, how many of them, in fact, do you get to, right?
Right. Yeah.
How many of them do you get to the point where you actually feel like you have a case? And then of those that you have a case, how many of them do you actually prove up?
Yes.
That's what he was asking. So you gave Mr. Fallon a number that you do 75 to 100 a year.
Right, so
So those 75 to 100?
I think I can try to answer your question this way, Dr. Ross. So the cases that we generally open and investigate, if we do an investigative report and we do a payment hold, let's say, or those are active cases for us, and so they're either going to be in the process of waiting for it to go to hearing, we'll send a final notice out, or we've made a referral to the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. So unless the provider goes out of business, we settle with that provider. I mean, and I can give you the cases that have been settled. Providers are going out of business, but the others that are out there, we're probably still pursuing them. I mean, so it's not as if you just go
So how long
away,
have you
I
been
guess.
there?
2011 as the Inspector General.
Okay, so can you tell us over the past 10 years how many cases, how many doctors have been investigated, and or do we just say that it's 75 times 10?
I can pull that information. No, so I want to say last session we had less than a handful of doctors under investigation. I mean, so
Okay, I'm sorry, doctors or clinics or whatever it is. How many investigations? When you said to Mr. Fallon that you do 75 to 100 a year,
completed, right?
that means that it could be a doctor, it could be somebody
DME
that
company,
sells DMEs.
orthodontist, a podiatrist, a therapist. I mean, yes,
Okay. So
number of things.
over the last 10 years, is it about 7,500 then? Because it's 75 a year or 100 a year?
I wouldn't hazard a guess. I mean, I don't know exactly. Of course, I'll say 2012 forward, investigations stepped up. I want to say 2011, there was maybe 27 of them. So I'd have to go back, and I don't know what the numbers were 10 years ago. I mean, I can get that data. It's there, I'm sure, in the Office of Inspector General, but I don't know that answer. I don't speak to when I've been there.
Well, would it be, I mean, what do you think for the last data of the last 10 years? Would that be helpful to us? Last 10, last 5? I'm just curious, I guess, over the last
Sure,
5
we can
years,
get you
the
an
last
answer.
10 years, certainly you can get the information about how
Absolutely.
many that you've how many investigations you've had,
Sure.
number one. How many of them you moved forward on, and that is, after you investigated, you felt like they were, in fact, committing fraud, right? You can tell us how many of those.
So you want to know how many I referred to the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit? That'd be the ones I thought were committing
Yes,
fraud. Sure.
and then how many of those in the end were adjudicated or finalized one way or another?
Or if they're still in the process, which would be most.
Well, yeah, but if I'm saying over the last 10 years, I mean, I'm guessing the ones 10 years ago and 9 years ago and 8 years ago and 7 years ago are not still in the process?
I will get the information.
Or are you telling us that, to your knowledge, what's the longest running investigation at this point on one of the cases that you guys have referred to the AG? I mean, 2 years, 1 year, 3 years?
4.
4 years.
Initially, when I
That's
came
the
in
oldest one.
2011, 48 months was about average. There was some longer than that, so I don't know the answer, but we'll get an answer.
So the
I'm not
longest
gonna
one,
get
is, as far as you know, is 4 years, and then maybe,
the average was 4. So
Oh,
that
the
means some were
average was
greater
4.
back then. Yeah.
so it takes us 4 years. Once you have figured out, in your opinion, that something was being done wrong, and it didn't take you 4 years, I guess, to figure that out, right?
No, sir.
But once you feel like you've seen enough that it that you've then forwarded it on to the AG's
Okay,
office.
fine.
On average, it's taken them 4 years to finish up the case.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The 48 months on average was just the OIG cases when I came in 2011. When we went and looked back, it appeared the average time for a case to get the combination of OIG was 48 months. I can't
so
really
that's
speak.
that doesn't even deal with the other, what happens after that. After you're
Right.
through with it.
Right.
Well, I guess it, anyway, I won't say anything else for right now. Ms. Rose?
Mr. Chairman, I was just trying to get a clarification as well, because it was my understanding that Chairman Zerwas wanted to know how many cases there were investigated and found not to have any issues. And I just wanted to make sure that I received that information as well.
Sure.
Well, if you could share it with the whole committee, that'd be great.
Right.
I'd love to know.
Sure. And when you say you haven't found any issues,
Well,
define that for me.
Well,
Because I don't really, what do you mean? There were no issues.
the allegations were not founded, I should say.
Okay.
Weren't proved up. How about that?
Right.
Well, if I can, Representative Rose, if I can just kind of expound on what she's asking, just the results. if there were, say, 100 cases,
Okay.
these were prosecuted and they were convicted, these folks was billing errors, but they're innocent billing errors within statistical acceptance. These folks, you know,
Sure.
these
Got it.
folks made restitution, et cetera. I think we'd all be very interested in
Correct.
that. Quick question, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
If you could, if you had more investigators, do you think you could compress this timeline with, you know, taking 4 years to close a case just out of your office? And
Oh,
then,
yeah. The 4 years isn't where we are currently. That was when I came in 2011. We've shrunk that a lot over the last several years, you're right. But yeah, as I said, I think the more investigators you have as you get leads, the caseloads aren't as big, and an investigator can focus on a case and bring it to conclusion. I mean, today they're carrying caseloads, and I'm investigating one thing. I've got to wait until they kind of get so far and then stop, then I can start the other thing. And so, yeah, the more people that we have, absolutely, we can move the investigations along much more expeditiously.
And to piggyback on Dr. Xeros's concern, too, I mean, I'm a business owner, and, you know, I wouldn't want a government agency breathing down my neck, particularly if I'm not doing anything wrong.
Sure.
I mean, we want the good doctors out there to practice medicine and care for their patients and,
Sure.
and move forward. And I know that sometimes the reimbursement rates aren't really what they would get if it was in the
Sure.
private sector, and so they are, you know, doing the community so much good. But we want to root out those folks,
Absolutely.
whether they're physicians or not, that these providers that are either padding or, you know, committing crimes and felony crimes in that matter. I just want to get to the bottom of it. So sharing that information with the results would be
Sure.
it would be great. But it's a bit alarming for me if we have 78,000. Do we have 78,000 providers that are being reimbursed? Is that the number?
I'll get the number. It's tens of thousands.
And before you came on board, there were sometimes in an entire year in the state of Texas, only 27 investigations were initiated by your office.
FY11 was 27 investigations.
You
That's a
know,
low number.
yeah, when you have 78,000 providers, some people are going to do wrong. Even 1%, 780. So, wow. Okay, thank you.
That was back before Doug came on. That was back during the Governor Perry era, and this is. During,
I think, isn't he still the governor?
Sorry. I apologize.
I have another question. So there are cases out there where investigations have taken place, and the results have been found that there were no issues or malfeasance happened, right?
I will go gather that information.
Oh, you don't want to answer my question. Okay.
I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, right. I mean, so what I would say is, and I'm going to say it again, the vast majority of providers do not see OIG. We don't see most of them at all. So we only look at providers where we think there is an issue of any kind at all. So if you're in our site, it's generally for a reason. Generally for a reason. So when you say that there was nothing going on, I have to look into that. We'll get there.
Well,
I don't know how to answer your question.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding during the during the 83rd legislative session, there were people who came and testified that they didn't have any problems within their dental practice. I think it was the
Oh,
dental.
they were testifying that that was the case. I don't know if that was the case.
Can I take the fifth down?
Okay, we'll just wait on your information. Thank you.
Only if you're afraid you might be indicted about something.
No, sir, not at all.
Yeah, and Doug, just for clarity, I think there are different things that you can find, and probably you dig hard enough, 100%, you're going to 100% of the time find something
Sure.
that is going to be, say, a program error. Okay, that's the way I phrase it. It's not fraud. It's perhaps an omission. That was something that should have been in documentation that was there.
Sure.
And again, I'm working off of anecdotal,
Sure.
reports to me as a representative.
Sure.
That I want to just get a sense around from real numbers in your all's place. How much of this results in program errors? How much of this results in true fraud and abuse? Which I'm way for. The problem comes is that during this period of time, which I think you've expedited now, but during this period of time where you put somebody on 100% hold for their Medicaid payments, the business is being destroyed, and not to mention later, 6 months later, that, you get a call and say, well, do we have all the information you're going to give us? And they say, yeah, you got everything I had. Have you even looked at it yet? No, I hadn't even been looked at. Okay, again, no sympathy for the ones out there, milking everybody for this, but for the person that has some kind of an omission that is probably pretty insignificant in the big picture thing. That's the kind of thing I'm really looking for. And so, you know,
Right.
I know you will find 100% of the time something that will say, well, you're out of compliance with this, or you're out of compliance with that. But what I would call pretty blatant fraud and abuse, that's the number I'm looking
We'll
for.
give you some examples of the kinds of things that we think we see. And to your point, Representative Zorwas, so you're right. There's some things that are just that are errors. Now, unfortunately, many providers think that if it's an error, they don't owe the money back, but it doesn't work that way. So if you take an error that you've been committing consistently for years, the same error, and it's a high dollar error, that equates to a lot of money. So for you to suggest, well, I did it accidentally, okay, fine, I accept it was an accident. You still owe the state of Texas, small numbers, $100,000. No, I don't, I'm not going to pay. I mean, at some point we've got to either come to an agreement on a settlement terms, or we have to go to a hearing, one or the other. Either one's okay with me, but
Well, I think
that therein lies the rub. I mean,
Yeah. I can see it on the other side of somebody who's taking care of a large number of Medicaid clients, for which not everybody out there is going to accept the Medicaid clients, but there's some practices that are willing to take that on, and they take on a pretty high volume of it in order to make it work from a financial point of view.
Sure.
As Representative Fallon pointed out, the dollars aren't the same as they are in the private sector, so, you know, practices figure out, you know, pretty efficient ways to help manage these services. And people are getting access to those services. That's what FRU is all about.
Absolutely.
So, you know, if all of a sudden we see a practice that has to shut down because of now they're in a period of 100% payment hold, this is before the surety bond, granted, and I think some of these things perhaps have ameliorated some of the concerns in the past.
Sure.
But there's still the situation that if you come in and you have an investigation, it can really shut down the practice and the ability for them to take care of the patients. If you have something that is, I'm going to say, is probably pretty insignificant, and when you extrapolate that number for what is a fairly insignificant thing. Again, I'm working off of anecdotes here, and that's why I would rather have the numbers. It is a big dollar amount. It's a big dollar amount. So.
And it is one of the concerns, this extrapolation deal, that wouldn't hold up in a court of law, I think. Let's have a judge over here. Let's say, I get a speeding ticket. I'm driving 90 miles an hour, right? And you can show that I drive, I get in San Antonio, you can show that I drive from Austin to Laredo and Laredo to Austin dozens of times in 1 year. And you say, I got you. I got you today at 90 miles an hour. Now, I can also see that you drive back and forth, 150 times. So I'm gonna figure that I'm gonna give you 15 tickets, because driving that often, surely this is not the only time you've driven 90 miles an hour, Mr. Raymond.
It's not how
I'm gonna give you
extrapolation
15
works, though.
tickets. I'm gonna extrapolate and figure 15 tickets. That's what you're doing here, man. You go find, it's like the doctor said, we have testimony on this, Doug, and we're going to probably have some more in a minute.
From non-actuaries, but I mean, we'd be happy to bring some actuaries up here to speak
well,
to this process, and historically it has held up in court. Other states are doing the same
Go try to
thing.
convict somebody in court and say, well, we found 5 instances where they did something, but they've had 5,000 patients. So we're going to figure that instead of 5 only, it's really 1,000 or what? They agree with me. You see what I'm saying? They agree with me about that speeding ticket thing, man. Anyway, Mr. Fallon, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just with all due respect, I believe you are an attorney, and I'm not.
I'm not an attorney.
You're not? Okay, good. Thank God. I knew I liked you. But, there's a difference between criminal and civil. Criminal is reasonable doubt. Civil is preponderance of the evidence. And we're talking about fines here a lot of the time in reimbursements. That's preponderance of the evidence, and that would hold up in court, in a civil court.
But if preponderance of the evidence, fine. If you're looking at 5,000 claims and you say, I found 5 mistakes, So now I'm going to charge you for 1,500 mistakes. That won't hold up.
Well, you know, to make
either,
it digestible, because we are both laypersons here and not attorneys, but like if you remember Steinman's high school in Chicago, they were the big fraud about they were cheating on their tests. They had a big academic competition, and it does work with extrapolation of numbers because they were a very average school. And suddenly they won the state championship in Illinois. And the reason why they won is because they had stolen the tests, and they knew what was coming. So they, so you looked, and the way they caught them was just they extrapolated numbers. They said, wait a minute, how in the world can a school that was, mediocre, let's just say 300th out of 1,000 schools, become number one overnight? And it was a statistical anomaly that was so strong that, again, preponderance of the evidence and probably reasonable doubt, but it wasn't a criminal case in that instance, and they exposed it. So I think that's what we're talking about here is when you have statistics that simply, do not match up, and that initiates the investigation, and then you have to find more evidence, and then moving forward. So it's, again, I think it's preponderance of the evidence we're talking about.
And I would on the issues of fraud, I have any problem with that. Again, I mean, that they need to be put out of business, frankly. I don't have any patience for that, and extrapolation is probably a pretty effective way to do that. But if there's a significant number of investigations that result in some lesser error, I'm going to call it, or something less than fraud, if that can even be segregated out, I think that is perhaps an unreasonable thing to be looking at in terms of because the dollars get so high so fast through that extrapolation methodology.
Oh yeah,
and then I think we end up compromising legitimate practices that can correct what the non-compliance issue was, but without having to take on that huge financial hit. That for some people, it's just going to put them out of business.
Sure, Doc. I mean, the nightmare scenario is, you get a practice gets investigated, and there was just some, like you're saying, innocent errors that had totaled to maybe $8,000, and yet we expend resources from the state and the tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to recover 10 grand, and then they get a stop, their payment stopped for a year, and it hurts their practice and may, damage it beyond repair. We don't want that as a nightmare scenario. I don't think with, when we're talking about hard data here, if we have 78,000 providers in the state of Texas and less than 100 are investigated, it's certainly not running rampant. I mean, they're not investigating thousands of cases, but I still would nonetheless like to know, of the 80 or so, how many come out with a clean bill of health. I think, again, that's just hard data. So I agree.
Before I leave it, as I've understood their testimony last session, you didn't have a lot of those that they determined, it's only $8,000 we're going after. They extrapolated on all of them. Am I wrong about that?
That is correct.
I'm correct.
You are correct.
All right, so they extrapolate on all of them, Pat. Even if it's 8,000, they say, it ain't 8,000, it's 8,000 times, we're going to extrapolate. And it turns into a big number. Anyway, can you come sit up here? Members, any other questions for right now? No. Can we ask you to come and sit in Chris Traylor's seat?